Now we shall have sort of a European view on the relations with Russia and hopefully also relations with Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus, well, in the neighborhood. So I do hope that Francois Heisbourg will raise to these expectations. I'm quite certain that you can do it. You can do it.
Well, thank you, Janusz. I'm not sure I will actually. When I was listening earlier on to the question about Ukraine as a nuclear power, and I was scratching my head as to what amount of reassurance we would have required if a nuclear Ukraine was being torn between Madame Tymoshenko, Mr. Yanukovych, and Mr. Yushchenko. And I'm very, very glad indeed that we have not had to face this contingency. No, to be entirely serious, and speaking after Fyodor, I have to first of all thank him for having put China firmly up there on the screen, because that is also exactly what I'm going to do. The sense of provincialism which sometimes permeates NATO discussions is somewhat odd, because we've been talking about global NATO, we've been talking about out of area and so forth, but usually China only gets a glancing reference here and now. So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is, first of all, look at our meaning the European members of NATO, and of course NATO as a whole vis-à-vis Russia, and then to move to the relationship between the European members of NATO and the United States of America, and the potential, and I underline the word potential, unifying factor provided by the rise of China. First, Russia. There's been some discussion about the dual approach, reassurance and engagement, remarks by Heather. I take the view that the dual approach makes a lot of sense, and I will not belabor that point, but I also take the view that each of the prongs of the dual approach has to be able to stand on its own merits. That you do not develop a force by putting together two weaknesses, you develop a stronger force if you put together two strong policies. So reassurance in particular has to pass that test in terms of the effect it will have on our security relationship with Russia. There is a flip side to reassurance. That is, I am very much in favor, and I've said so in various places during the NATO debate, about having contingency planning, about having exercises, about fulfilling the unfulfilled promises. But then we have to reflect on what does this do to the relationship with Russia. And here my answer will tend to be quite positive. I don't believe for 1 second that demonstrating seriousness in our actions as a defense alliance will create problems with Russia. And let me give a practical reason for saying what I'm saying. Russia, of course, as we know, was not particularly happy about the Baltics getting into NATO. But in Russia's unhappiness vis-à-vis that event, there is one aspect which is very, very weak, which hardly figures. And that is the fact that NATO for once was sort of serious, and that is, yes, we do participate actively in the air defense of the Baltic states. I would add also of Iceland, since the removal of the American base up there. Does that create problems with the Russians? Well, it can, but very quickly, once the rules of that particular game are known, you have greater predictability. The Russians tend to be serious people about defense affairs. I am not shocked by a maneuver such as Zapad 09. I find the scenario rather distasteful, but the fact of holding Zapad 09 strikes me as a normal activity between two countries which have a defense arrangement. the notion that you create respect and that you create stability by declaring on the one hand that you have Article 5, that you are a defense organization, and at the same time you do nothing of the things which one normally expects a defense organization to do. That creates problems. It creates opportunities for miscalculation, for mischief, for misreading. So I would argue quite strongly that the reassurance side of the dual approach, if handled with due caution and respect and courtesy, is not one which is going to create us problems with Russia. Now, the other prong of the dual approach, engagement, openness. My reading of Russia today is that of a country which is in a great state of flux. It is not in a state of stasis. Who knows who will run in the 2012 election? To take just that very minor aspect. What do we know about the conclusions in foreign and security policy terms which Russia may draw from its apparently growing determination to enter into some form of economic modernization? What conclusions will Russia draw from the catastrophic energy dependency of Russia, the dependency of Russia on shrinking gas and to some extent oil revenue? Anybody who has been following the natural gas markets recently knows that there's been a revolution in that field, that the United States of America will be once again self-sufficient in terms of natural gas. A number of companies, Conoco, Talisman, etc., are actually working in Poland on the geological deposits of the same sort which have now been demonstrated in the US as being exploitable natural gas terms. The impact on the natural gas market has been immediate. Prices of natural gas are no longer tied to the prices of oil. The prices of natural gas are going like this. The development of new gas fields in Russia is being put on hold. My own country has a major firm called Total, which has been working on the Stockman contract. Well, nothing is going to happen very quickly in Stockman. And nothing is going to happen very quickly for phase 2 of Nord Stream in consequence. There are going to be a lot of useless pipelines over the next few years between Europe and the former Soviet Union. And this is a big problem for Russia. What conclusions will Russia draw from that situation? The replay of the Igor Gaidar book on the end of empire, where he explained how the catastrophic fall of energy revenue in the Soviet Union between 86 and 89 was one of the contributing factors to things spinning out of control under Gorbachev in the former Soviet Union. This Russia is in a state of flux. The idea of joining NATO, which had been played with occasionally 15 years ago, it's now back on the intellectual radar screen. The report by Igor Jurgens. Now, Igor Jurgens may be a liberal, but he's not a Yabloko liberal. He's not a Khodorkovsky liberal. He's not a Kasparov liberal. He's a Putin-Medvedev liberal, because that's where he comes from. That's where he comes from. Sergei Karaganov's piece in the latest issue of Survival at the IISS. He does some of his usual stuff, but towards the end of the piece, he's joining NATO. Now,